My name's Don McLeod. I'm the CEO at Zora Township. I'll be co-hosting this with Peter Crockett from the County of Oxford. And at this time, I'd like to call upon Mayor and Warden David Mayberry to bring greetings.
For those of you that are actually following the agenda, you'll see now that it's 7:05 and that my time is up at 7:05. So thank you very much for coming out. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out. The challenge that we're facing is a community challenge, and every one of us needs to be involved. And it is absolutely wonderful to see people come out and say that together we can make a difference here, and that we can oppose what could be a life-changing sort of event in our communities. The purpose of tonight's meeting, though, is, and it's being presented by the JMCC, the Joint Municipal Coordinating Committee, is really about making sure that the public is very well informed about what's happening, and that you know where we are in this process. And for most of you, the last couple of months has been very quiet. In fact, for the JMCC, it's been very quiet because, well, not much has happened. And tonight we want to explain, well, it doesn't appear that anything's happening, what actually might be happening, and so we want to talk about that for the landfill proposal, and also to talk a little bit about where we are in the air quality assessment that the county is doing. I do want to thank three county councillors who have joined Mayor Lupton and I here tonight to show their solidarity in the county's concern. Here in the front we have Don McKay, Mayor of East Zora Tavistock, and over to the side Mayor Trevor Birch from Woodstock, and Mayor Larry Martin from Norwich. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Don, and as I say, thank you very much for showing up tonight.
Okay, at the head table is Warden Mayberry, who you've met. Beside him is Mayor Margaret Lupton from Zora Township. Mayor Lupton is also chair of the JMCC. Next is Councillor Gord Lesser from the town of Ingersoll. And Michael Graves is the clerk from the town of Ingersoll. And Mary Ellen Greb, CAO from the township of Southwest Oxford. So just a bit of background on the JMCC, and Peter Pickfield, lawyer for the county and the township, will go into a bit further detail. The JMCC is comprised of the mayors and CAOs of the 4 member municipalities: Zora, Southwest Oxford, Ingersoll, and the County of Oxford. The committee was formed in 2012 to coordinate municipal involvement in the provincial process for the landfill proposal. One of the primary reasons the JMCC was formed was a unique situation where the 3 municipalities were all impacted by the landfill. So it was kind of the best way that the 3 could work together to try and coordinate their concerns and bring those forward to the province. Before Peter Crockett sets out the context for holding the meeting, I just want to briefly touch on an issue tonight that is not covered on the agenda but does relate to air quality issues in Zora Township. Several weeks ago, the Township Council passed an interim control bylaw that has the purpose of placing a 1-year moratorium on the establishment of new and expanding aggregate operations in Zora Township. What this will do is put a hold on any new applications until a policy review is carried out that will look at the policies from the county's official plan, the township zoning bylaw, and also doing a best practice for what's used across the province. It is anticipated the study will bring forward recommendations, including the appropriate amendments to the OP and zoning bylaw for consideration by county and township council. And just a couple of facts. I've got the podium, so I'll just throw these out. Zora is the 7th largest aggregate producing municipality in the province and has 48 licensed pits. These pits and quarries encompass 2,730 hectares. To put that in context, that's the equivalent of 67 100-acre farms, or an area that would cover 20% the size of Kitchener or 60% of the city of Woodstock. Zora Council is very concerned over the cumulative impacts on air, water, and the municipal road system. So we have this along with the landfill, and it's taking a toll on council, and they're trying their best to make sure that they're protecting the residents. We have set up a special section on the township website to provide information on the interim control bylaw, and it can be found at www.zora.on.ca. If you have any questions on the bylaw, both myself and Peter Pickfield will be available to answer any questions at the end of the meeting or during the Q&A process. Peter Crockett will now set the context for tonight's meeting.
First, we'll introduce everybody that's sitting at the head tables if we could. We've met, of course, David Mayberry, the mayor of Southwest Oxford, and the warden of the county, Mayor Margaret Lupton from the township of Zora, Councillor Gord Lesser from the town of Ingersoll. Next to Councillor Lesser is Michael Graves, the clerk for the town of Ingersoll, and Mary Ellen Greb, Mary Ellen Greb from the as CAO from the town of Southwest Oxford. We're having technical difficulties. So just to put this into context, if I could for a moment, it came out of the desire to make sure with the new term of council that we had the opportunity to get all of the councillors up to speed on an equal plane, if you will, of information. And so through the course of November, we held a number of orientations. We held a special orientation that included the members of County Council, the members of Zora Township Council, members of Ingersoll Council, and members of Southwest Oxford Council. And through that dialogue, we talked about the Beachville air quality, we talked about the landfill site and its state, and the discussion around the room was it was appropriate and an appropriate time to begin to talk again with the public and give you a little bit more insight and update in terms of where things are. And quite frankly, the whole concept of inform and engage is very much embedded in our strategic plan from a county standpoint, and it's very much a focal point, if you will, from a council standpoint. These two issues, the Walker Southwestern landfill proposal and the Beachville air quality assessment work, is obviously, or are both obviously, very significant issues. We know that there is not only a significant amount of citizen concern, we as the orders of government are very concerned about the two issues as well. We understand the relationship of our air, these two proposals, and of course the drinking water that we all use, and the tie back to the environment. So it is very key, a very significant issue for us. We recognize that need to balance the environmental, the social, and the economic aspects of our community, and obviously put a lot of concern and emphasis on that. So the purpose of tonight is to update everybody in terms of the work that's lately been reported. Today was reported actually to County Council on the Beachville airshed, and then to update in terms of the landfill proposal, the work that has been done historically, where the process is, and to gain some insight in terms of where the process is and where it may go, and then of course to hear from you and to get some insight and some comments from yourselves, and of course if appropriate, the experts that will be are in the room will be able to answer those questions as well. Our speakers tonight are Peter Haywood. He's the Manager of Health Protection at Oxford County's Public Health. He's going to talk about the Beachville airshed air quality assessment work. And Peter Pickfield of Garrett Pickfield. He's the legal counsel for the Joint Municipal Coordinating Committee on the Walker Southwest landfill proposal. Also with us tonight at the far end is Deborah Carr. She's an epidemiologist with our Public Health Department. And Dr. Douglas Neal, he is our Acting Medical Officer of Health for the County of Oxford. Next to him is Diane Damon from DC Damon and Associates. She is our facilitator for the evening. She's going to walk us through the rest of the evening and help to keep order and make sure that anybody that does have questions has an opportunity to have those questions heard and get answers to those questions. So I'll turn it over to Diane. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. And I'd also like to thank everyone for coming out this evening. I recognize some faces from a meeting we held here in July. The weather was a little bit nicer that night, but what can we do? We're in the middle of winter. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I turn over to Peter Haywood and Peter Pickfield to make their respective presentations. If you have not signed in, perhaps you could sign in. There was an attendance record as you came in this evening. There is also a handout, a summary of the Beachville air quality work that's been undertaken. On the flip side, some information on the Joint Municipal Coordinating Committee. That handout can be found at the side table there. In addition, there is a card available at the side table. This is a Speak Up Oxford card. If you have a question this evening and you'd prefer not to come up to the mic once we get into the question and answer period, please feel free to pick up a card and there'll be pens available. You can put your question on the card and put it in the box at the side table, and we will try to get to those questions this evening. We are here until approximately 9 o'clock this evening. Each of our presenters will provide an overview of these prospective projects, about 15-20 minutes in length. We'll follow each presenter with about a 30-minute question and answer period. And I'll go over some ground rules before we get into that Q&A session. Maybe just a quick reminder, I think probably most of you have already done this, but if you haven't turned off your cell phones, if you would please do so, that would be much appreciated. So I'm going to turn over the first part of this evening's presentation to Peter Haywood with Oxford County. Peter?
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to see many faces that I saw in July. You know, it's such an important community event, and I've engaged many of you over the past 6 months through the work process plan, and I've certainly appreciated all your input. So I'm here to provide you with a little bit of an update about what's going on with the Beachville area air quality assessment, because a lot of work has gone on in the past 4 to 6 months. We all know why we're here. There's a number of quarry operations within our community that's causing some air quality issues, and we want to investigate those problems further. And so we go back about 11, 12 years ago with the release of the Ministry of the Environment report. It identified a number of particular issues associated with the air quality, some gaps in information, and just the general collection of that air quality data. We identify that as being fragmented and full of gaps and holes. So when we come down to present day, there was a very concerned group of citizens who made a proposal to public health as well as to the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change for a comprehensive air quality assessment. And so the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change reviewed it. They decided against doing a comprehensive air quality assessment, but they would continue with the air monitoring within the Beachville area with their 3 monitoring units. Public health also reviewed it. We thought because the data was lacking, you know, as I mentioned, for the past 11 to 12 years. It was fragmented and incomplete. We thought it would be necessary for us to engage in an assessment process that would allow us to gather that information so we can make an informed decision later on. And so that's where we're kind of at. And with the development of the work plan, it included many stakeholders. The community, of course, the most important stakeholder of that entire group, the industry stakeholders, Public Health Ontario, the University of Guelph, and of course Public Health in the county and the area municipalities, and I'll get into that later. So we met with the concerned group of citizens on several occasions. It's been a very friendly discussion, very important and excellent input from the community, and we took their comprehensive air quality assessment request and have incorporated a large portion of that request into our own assessment work plan. And that particular assessment work plan is now posted on our website where you can review the contents of it. And I'll go through that in a moment what the contents entail. So what we want to do is, as part of the assessment, we want to make informed decisions. We understand when we're thinking about risk, there's the hazard. You know, the hazard being the particulate matter, that may cause a health impact. And we also understand the concern of the citizens within the community. And that's part of the risk equation, is when we're dealing with risk, we want to look at both components. What is the hazard and what is the concern of the community? How are people feeling? And so we've engaged the community to deal with that aspect of it in terms of how the community is feeling. And we've also engaged the services of Public Health Ontario as well as University of Guelph to look at the hazard part, the health hazard piece of it. And so both parts of the equation both parts are very important to the overall equation. So we're basing our information based on risk, and we hope at the end we have information that would base risk management strategies that we can implement in the future. Now, as I mentioned, it's very important that we engage the community, and the feedback from the community is filling our assessment plan. And we did that by going through a short survey back in July when the weather was nicer. And that survey went until September 9th. And we received 103 responses from the community. So that was actually an excellent response rate. And it wasn't a quantitative survey in the sense where we're doing statistical analysis to determine what is significant and what is not significant. It was just more univariate analysis, meaning that we looked at one variable to determine what people's feelings are, their attitudes are towards the air quality. And what we found is that almost 20% of people thought the air quality has improved in the last 10 years. And 18.9% said the air quality has stayed about the same. And 14.5% said the air quality was good to very good. However, having said that, 72% of the respondents felt that the air quality within Beachville was poor to very poor. And so certainly that was an important trigger for us. So when we identified the issues, certainly there was a very vocal group about the air quality within the community, but in general we can say that the perception of air quality within Beachville is poor. So that kind of triggered us to move forward further with the assessment. 36% reported that the air quality has gotten worse in the last 10 years, and 23% reported they didn't know how to rate the air quality in the Beachville area. So I found that interesting too, because we're trying to enhance awareness about air quality within Beachville. So that's a kind of a trigger for us to move forward with some education and promotional activities that would generate awareness in what air quality means within the community, how we measure it, how we articulate the risks associated with it. And so that's something that we're working on as well. 35% report that air quality in the Beachville area affected their health or the health of a family member. That's really another very important stat for us, because at this moment in time, we're not sure of what the outcome of the assessment will look like. Right now we're in the gathering mode, we're gathering information, we're trying to determine what that next step may entail about a year from now when we're finished the actual assessment piece. But if people are feeling that the air quality is affecting their health, an outcome that could take place is a comprehensive human health impact assessment, which was originally requested by the group several months ago. So that's perhaps an outcome that could happen at the end of this particular assessment period. But once again, we're in the gathering stage where we're gathering information about the air quality within Beachville because of that 11-year gap in information. So what we want to do, what the community want to do is they want real-time monitoring of ambient air quality. So we've linked with Public Health Ontario. They've been a very supportive agency for us. If people who don't know Public Health Ontario, they are a provincial entity at arm's length with the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. Within their department, they have many different specialists, toxicologists, epidemiologists, environmental health specialists that support what we're doing here within the Beachville area. And so they're also lending us their equipment. We have 2 dust-tracked air monitoring units that we have used back in the fall, and now they're taking those results and analyzing them, which we should be able to report back to you very shortly, sometime in the spring. And I just want to send out my appreciation and thanks to those 2 or 4 property owners that have lent their properties to us to demonstrate the air quality air monitoring units, and your contributions are very much appreciated. We'll be starting that again in the spring and going into the summer and fall. So if there are people who are interested in participating in the air monitoring study and we can use their property to set up our air equipment, we do have a sign-up sheet in the back there, and we can get your name and number. We can move forward with that. You also want, the community also wants frequent public reporting of ambient air quality. Very important. Public health is always in the mode of advisories and alerts, informing public so they can make those informed decisions about how to protect themselves. You know, as a very simple example, when there's poor beach water quality, we issue a beach advisory to advise people not to swim in that area. So people want to be informed about when the air quality is poor within their community. And so, you know, that's another aspect that we can look at. The implementation of risk mitigation strategies. Once again, we're not sure what this is going to look like, but obviously, instead of just advising people about the air quality, you want to basically improve that air quality overall so that you can feel well and healthy. And that's really a mandate of Oxford County Public Health, is to promote the well-being of the community and to ensure healthy environments. And so that's what we're driving towards. The assessment aims to assess the particulate information that reflects the current environmental conditions across Beachville area. As I mentioned, we had about an 11-year gap of information where we felt, Oxford County felt, that the information that was gathered over those number of years was incomplete, fragmented, and that didn't enable us to make any informed decisions about the air quality within Beachville, which is why we aligned ourselves with Public Health Ontario so that we can gather new information. Now, in support of the Ministry of the Environment, they have improved over the past 12 to 18 months, where they have taken control of the air monitoring within the community of Beachville through the 3 air monitoring units that they have here. That's unlike the past, where more of the industry had control of that information. Now they have their own air monitoring. They're collecting the data, and they did report on the data about, I think, 6 months of data during the last meeting in July. And I would expect they would report on the next 6 months quite shortly, to be honest. I am meeting with the Ministry of Environment in a couple of weeks to discuss kind of next steps about how that air monitoring data will be reported to the community that's been collected over the past 12 months. We want to compare observed particulate matter levels to ministry standards and ambient air quality criteria, interim guidelines, and Canada-wide standards. The units that we're using, the dust tract air monitoring units, are not EPA approved, but we can calibrate and measure them against EPA approved units. And EPA stands for Environmental Protection Association. And so what we'll be doing in the spring is the information that we gathered and collected with those air monitoring units will be calibrated against the EPA monitoring units that the Ministry of the Environment uses. So we can, once again, make some correction factors and have a good comparison so that we can apply it to the Canada-wide standards. We want to identify possible short-term trends in local particulate matter concentrations. And so when we're measuring the air quality within Beachville, we're going to be looking for blooms. And so some of the preliminary information that I've seen that's been collected with the dust track machinery has identified a couple spikes within the air quality within Beachville during certain times. We don't know why that is at the moment. That could be associated with weather, it could be associated with agricultural practices, it could be associated with the winter and wood burning stoves. But the Public Health Ontario and Public Health will be looking at some of the factors that may be associated with those low spikes of particulate matter. And once again, I mentioned that we should be able to have a report on the air quality that was collected in October sometime in the spring, so quite soon. The assessment aims to review the evidence concerning the potential health impacts of a nearby community exposure to particulate matter generated by the aggregate operation. So recently we have engaged with the University of Guelph. We've also engaged with master's students within the University of Guelph to conduct a comprehensive literature review of how particulate matter impacts human health. And so we're very excited by this partnership. We have literally thousands of citations to review as it relates to particulate matter and human health. And being Oxford County Public Health, we certainly depend on resources from other locations, including Public Health Ontario and now the University of Guelph. And so when we have the next report, we should have some very good information for you about the impacts of particulate matter on human health and what that entails. And so we're working with these students at the moment under supervision of a doctor there. And we should be able to gather some very good information for you over the coming weeks. Lastly, increase public engagement in practices and activities that support air quality improvement efforts in the Beachville area. As I mentioned, you, the community, are the most important stakeholder in this whole process. Your feedback is very important to the process. As I mentioned, I've had great relationships with many members of the community on this particular assessment piece, and we certainly have appreciated your input on this. We are going to continue to do this, of course. Being here today and providing this update is evidence of that. And you know, you are the people who are living in this community, and you know, so it's impacting your health. And so I'm not living here in this community, so I need to know how you're feeling, what you're seeing, when you're seeing, what you're seeing, why you're seeing things. And so continue to give me calls or give me emails so that we can gather that information, because that's a vital piece to the overall assessment program. So just to overview some of the key actions, we're continuing with our partnership with Public Health Ontario. Dr. Copes does send his regrets today. He did want to be here, but he's a busy person, so he had a couple meetings in Toronto to attend. But what I love about Dr. Copes is he's also a medical doctor, but he's also a public health professional. He's able to create that bridge, that linkage between the medical side and the public health side. And he's an easy person to relate to, and obviously a very intelligent person as it relates to air quality. And his team of scientists and researchers and public health professionals have been very supportive of what we've been doing thus far. And so we're continuing that relationship with them, of course. We'll continue to consult with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. They are the regulators of air quality as it pertains to the industry. So we will be working with them closely. As I mentioned, they have improved the collection of the data over the past 12 to 18 months as they've taken control of it. And then we should be expecting some more reports with regards to the air quality from the Ministry of Environment. The academic support I mentioned from the University of Guelph for the literature review. We need to understand what is the human health impact of particulate matter, and if we don't understand that, and that's a huge gap in our own research, so we need to identify that health hazard, what it means, and how it may affect human health. And so doing that literature review is a very important activity for us as we move forward with that through the University of Guelph. The community relations, as I mentioned, and I can't overstate enough, is probably the most vital piece of all this. It's you, the community, that are feeding our work plan, our assessment, and we need to continue that very positive and strong relationship that we have so that we can move forward and gain a better understanding of how the particulate matter within your community is affecting you on a daily basis. And so we'll continue to have web pages and public information sessions, question and answer documents and sessions, as well as surveys to gather that information. So as I mentioned, this spring we'll continue with the air monitoring units. We have 2 dust tracks, and as I mentioned, if anyone's interested in participating, there's a sign-up sheet there. I still have some names I need to go through from the original session. And we plan to do that through the spring, the summer, and the fall. We'll conduct that literature review. We'll hold additional public information sessions. This is our reporting plan. So this is kind of the preliminary report. So today at County Council, Oxford County Public Health presented the preliminary report, kind of the final assessment. And as I said, that was a huge process to go through because we accepted the feedback and from many different stakeholders, but we finally had completed it and we presented to the County Council today. We'll report again to the community sometime in July, and I envision that report to contain at least a preliminary report on the literature review as well as the results from the October sampling that was conducted. And then the final report hopefully will be done sometime in December or January, and that final report is really the important report. It's going to identify what those next steps may look like for this community as it relates to the air quality. And that's the end of my presentation. I'll give Diane the...
Thank you very much, Peter, for that informative update. It sounds to me like this evening's meeting is an important component of an overall ongoing public consultation process. So this will not be the only opportunity to become engaged in this issue. Before we get into the question and answer period, just a few ground rules. If you have a question, I'd ask you to please come up to the microphone and state your name and where you live. And we'll have one person speak at a time. We'll have their full attention. I'd like you to avoid any side conversations that can be distracting to other people. There may be, we have about half an hour for questions and answers. I may need to stop and interrupt someone if we're going off a little too far on a tangent, or if there are other people that want an opportunity to speak, to ask a question, or make a comment. So I'd like to get right into it for the Q&A session before we turn our attention to the landfill issue. So I welcome anyone to step up to the microphone, please. Yes, good evening, sir. Your name is?
My name is George Van Dorp. 5 miles west of me is the aggregate areas, and I live beside the village of Sweetburg, and I had volunteered my farm for testing. But what I've noticed, I catch the roof water, rainwater, and irrigate my farm with it. But on the days when we get a heavy dew, I notice that the water coming off my roofs is grayish white. I wondered if testing the water coming off the roofs would be an accurate way of seeing what's falling from the sky in my area.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for your question, George. Peter.
Thanks, George, for your question. Good question. I don't really have the answer at the moment for you, but that's certainly something that I can ask either the Ministry of Environment or Public Health Ontario about the collection of rainwater. It wouldn't surprise me if we find some matter in it, because obviously the milky grayness of it indicates that it's that it contains something. But what that means, I'm not too sure. But that's something we can certainly look at. If we're collecting air, why can't we collect other samples? And I'll see the feasibility of that, so I can get back to you, George.
Okay, thank you again for bringing that to our attention. Yes, your name is?
My name's Suzanne Krellin, and
Suzanne?
I work in Ingersoll, and most of my family lives in Ingersoll. I just wondered, as far as sort of the potential legal aspects of the situation, this question is directed to Dr. Neal. I'm wondering if there'd be any point where you'd be willing to draw on the powers of the Chief Medical Officer of Health for the province, where they have the power to act where a situation exists anywhere in Ontario that constitutes or may constitute a risk to the health of any persons, upon which they may apply to the judge at the Superior Court of Justice for an order to protect the community.
Okay, Dr. Neal. Just bear with us for a moment. Oh, it should be working.
It's on now?
Can everyone at the back hear?
Well, that's a good question. I guess from my standpoint, I would have to have sufficient evidence that that were a concern. And I'm certain presenting that sort of a problem to the Chief Medical Officer of the province, they would want to have, he or she, it's in transition right now, as you may know, he or she would need to have that sort of evidence. And to the best of my knowledge, we don't have that at this present time. However, we are in the process of trying to gather some substantial objective evidence as to what exists here. And, you know, that's part of the process. But yes, if it ever turned out that there was a significant problem, we would move forward on it, I'm sure.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Yes, sir.
Tim Lobson, Ingersoll. We mentioned about, Peter mentioned impact about 17 times. I lost count after 17. We have a request in from the JMCC on a health impact study, asking that Walker do that instead of a health risk assessment. And from the way I understand it, if a health risk assessment is if you already have 100 trucks, they only look at the new 100 trucks. They don't count 200 trucks. They count 100 trucks. If you've already got bad air quality, they're only going to look at the landfill air quality. They're not going to look at the air quality that's already here, the accumulated effects. Am I out in left field, or is that right? I'd like somebody from the JMMC or whoever's running the show to answer that.
Okay, Tim, I think we're starting to venture a little bit into the other issue, but Peter, did you want
Not
to?
really, because the air quality was brought up because of that.
Fair enough, sir, yes. Did you want to address the issue of cumulative impacts relative to the work that's being undertaken?
So, Tim, if I'm understanding your question properly, excuse me, you're saying that there's kind of taking into consideration the current impacts, so that current 100 trucks, and not taking into consideration the past impacts? Is that what you're saying?
Why did JMCC ask for a health impact?
Right, okay, so in terms of a human health impact assessment, it differs quite substantially from a risk assessment, in that a human health impact assessment entails not only the health impacts of an issue, but also entails how the social impacts of the issue may affect the community. So it goes beyond just the physical and biological aspects of risk or of a hazard, and goes into the economics and the social aspects of the community and how people are feeling if they were, say, exposed to a landfill site or air quality. And so that's kind of the differences between a risk assessment and a human health impact assessment, whereas the human health impact assessment goes beyond the hazard, the actual physical hazard, and takes into consideration the social well-being of the community.
Okay, thank you again for your question, Tim. Yes, your name is?
I'm Tamara Brown, and I'm
Tamara.
from Waterloo Region, and I want to send a thank you for everybody who's doing this air quality assessment. I wanted to let you know it's having a ripple effect, because my region, Peel Region, several others are now actually looking at the impacts of air qualities on aggregates because of groups like this. And so thank you so much, and I insist you keep it up. Given that the Six Nations are rightfully concerned by the levels of furans and dioxins released by the Kearns incinerator, which was recently measured at 16,000 times the permitted level, and area manufacturing facilities have a certificate of approval indicating release of dioxins and furans, has there been and will there continue to be scrupulous monitoring and compliance enforcement?
Okay, who would like to address that question for Tamara? Sure, Peter, if you would, please.
Sorry, is it Tamara or Tara?
Tamara.
Tamara, okay. It's a good question, because as a public health agency, as Oxford County Public Health, we don't have regulatory authority over these industries. That lies with the Ministry of Health and Long-Term, Ministry of Health and Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. And so, having said that, though, I think Suzanne brought up the question about the powers of the Chief Medical Officer of Health and the Medical Officer of Health locally. And we do have powers under the Health Protection and Promotion Act to issue orders if we believe upon reasonable and probable grounds that a health hazard exists. And so our very first step when we're dealing with these issues will always go back to the regulatory authority. So if we identify through our assessment process that there is indeed a health issue, a health hazard present, we would contact the Ministry of the Environment and say, this is what we identified, these are some of our recommendations. We feel that you have responsibility to correct the situation, and then we will kind of wait for them to say, okay, we're going to be doing something or not. If we felt that they were not doing something, and we felt there was still a high risk within the community, that's when, as Dr. Neal said, we would probably issue an order under the Health Protection and Promotion Act to alleviate that risk, and to issue, within the context of the order, mitigation strategies. So once again, we can mitigate that risk within the community. So that's how we would function when it comes to the regulatory aspect of this particular issue. I do appreciate your comments about how others within the province are following the footsteps of the Beachville community and also Oxford County Public Health. I've actually received several calls from many of my colleagues across the province about what Oxford County Public Health is doing to address this issue. So it is somewhat of a good feeling in that regard, because they're looking for us in terms of how we've engaged the community and some of our technical activities that we've engaged in.
Just to follow up, though, because I understand the process. This is a specific one where we do know it's a concern. People are raising it as an issue, and it is 16,000 times. I know that you can go to the MOE. I'm more asking, will you, and make it an issue during this process? And I know there are other mechanisms besides the HPPA, like there's the EPA. What else can you do? Just, we're putting it out there to hopefully make it more of a concern.
So for this particular issue, the air quality issue you're talking about?
And specifically the dioxins and furan counters, because it is as high as it is.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're always going to bring things forward. That information that you gather, where did that come from?
I can't even tell.
Okay, so maybe you and I can talk afterwards, and then I can look at the information and go from there. I'm more than happy to liaise with the Ministry of Environment on any issue. That'll be a pleasure of mine to do.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tamara. Yes, sir.
Good evening. Howard DeJong, presently Ingersoll, formerly half a mile away from here. Thank you very much for your work, your continued direction and everything, the whole 20 minutes worth of work. And obviously the public is paying for all of these tests, and we need them. There's no doubt about it. My question is, it's all about trying to prove what is out in the air and all this kind of stuff when it is a condition of the industry that produces it. It's a condition of their license to become and remain compliant with air quality testing and with water bypasses, and it is an M&R license. If they are not compliant and haven't been compliant, what is Oxford County Board of Health doing in the direction of the M&R in regard to enforcement and compliance of the industry?
Okay, thank you, Howard. I'll turn back to Peter for that.
Yeah, another great question, Howard. It goes back to my answer a little bit in the sense that we would work with them from a regulatory perspective. Having said that, though, say if they are in compliance, they're meeting the standards prescribed by the Ministry of Environment, they're meeting their certificate of approval. So say if they are. Well, public health historically, and will continue to do, will advocate on behalf of the people within any community across Ontario, across Canada, to better things. And so when we think about no smoking bylaws, bike helmets, baby seats, vaccination, food safety, the reason why we've reached these milestones in public health is because the community has voiced their concern. Public health has advocated on behalf of the community to change standards, to change regulations, and to, once again, make it better for the communities across Canada. And that's certainly something that Oxford County Public Health could do. So hypothetically, if they were in full compliance with the standards prescribed by the M&R and by the Ministry of Environment, but we still felt there was an issue, there was an impact on human health, I wouldn't hesitate to say that we would advocate on your behalf to change regulation, to advocate for that change so that we can make it a better community in the future.
Just to follow that, compliance also includes required reporting. The required reporting that has been missing or intermittent over the last 11 years is exactly the issue that is causing this situation. Secondly, in the last couple of months, we just found out that there's water bypass issues directly to the river. I believe that that is the non-compliance you're suggesting, and that an M&R push by the Oxford County Board of Health is in order.
No, and that's a very fair statement, and I would agree with that push as well. Anytime there's non-compliance, Oxford County Public Health is here on behalf of the community, and once again, we meet and liaise with the Ministry of Environment on many issues. I would say if you have direct issues, throw me an email, or we can talk afterwards, and I'd be more than happy to address them. I know that the enforcement officer for the Ministry of Environment, when he's done the assessments of those industries, he hasn't seen perfection. He has seen issues, and those issues have been corrected, and sometimes they reoccur. So as an inspector, I know when I go into a premises, my job is to identify issues. I mean, that's my job. I don't expect perfection to occur. And so I jot down those infractions, I identify the requirements to mitigate those fractions, and then we go forward. And so that's kind of the role that public health could take in this regard as well, is to work with the Ministry of Environment on that.
Just a few word response.
Yeah.
Is lack of enforcement an issue?
Is lack of enforcement, better question for the Ministry of Environment, because I'm not familiar with their enforcement protocol as it relates to these particular industries. And once again, they are the regulators, they're the ones who do the assessments and the inspections. And so that's probably a better question for the Ministry of Environment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Howard. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Mike Farlow, and I live in Ingersoll. And first of all, I'd like to thank all the citizens that have come out for this issue. Oxford County is the greatest place in the world to live, and it's because of this involvement that it will stay great and be made greater. And I'd also like to thank all the elected officials and the public sector officials that have come out, it shows good governance. And it's just like why I wasn't born here, but I plan to die here. My question is, if I could just preface it a bit, it has to deal with the lack of evidence that's been provided regarding the air quality in this area. And in there's a provincial officer report that says since 1975, you can show it first, there have been regular violations of air quality standards in the Beachville area. And the next diagram, please. Vanna White wasn't available. Yes. This diagram from 1988 shows deaths from respiratory disease by county. The red is the highest, and those of you can probably recognize by the shape that Oxford County in 1988 was assessed as having the highest death rates for males from respiratory disease, and that was based on county. And so since 1975 to 1988, and then in 2003 there was an air report summary that came out, and it stated that this study says that quarries are a significant cause of poor air quality. So this is from 1975 to 2003, and the dust keeps coming. And so in 2004, there was a provincial order saying there should be no visible dust crossing Highway 6, and the dust keeps coming. And then in 2009, there was a report from Halton Medical Officer of Health, which supported by Dr. Cope's report, that of the tiny dust, anything over a measurement of 15 is dangerous. The scant data we received from the Ministry of the Environment showed that at times it was as high as 147. And the data from Halton says that for every 10 units above 15, there's an increase in hospital visits and premature deaths. So when you go from 15 to 25, there's more hospital visits, more deaths. 25 to 35, more visits, more deaths. 35 to 45, all the way up to 147. So now we're from 1975 to 2009. There's also a 20% increase for each of those 10 units in severe asthma attacks in children. And there should be a picture of one of our buses driving right through these clouds of dust. And so not only are the school kids driving through these, but it's also some of the schools are located in this dust. And still, the dust keeps coming. So my question is, I appreciate what's being done now, but I mean, there isn't a mystery in this room that there isn't dust and there isn't a problem and where it's coming from. And I know if during the summer, we wash these plates to save styrofoam going into the garbage. And we had an inspector come out from the Department of Health, issue this report that said the temperature of the water we'd have to have, and that we'd have to use test strips to attain, to ensure that there was 100 parts per million of chlorine in the water. That was to wash this dish, and that happened immediately. My question is, when are we going to get one of these saying the dust has to stop?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for reporting on the research that you've conducted. Peter, do you have a response? The work is in progress. Perhaps you'd like to just address some of the things that Mike has raised.
You always make it tough, Mike, with the big questions. But that's okay.
I don't want you to think I don't appreciate everything that's being done now, but you need, the history is there. So
I appreciate the challenge, I appreciate the concern, and these are important questions that you have. I guess it goes back a little bit to my previous answers, and we are not the regulatory authority, but we do have powers and abilities to mitigate risk, to influence change. That's why I envision that we would do in the event that this assessment identifies a serious issue. I don't doubt that there's dust. I know there's dust. I've seen it. I've been on some people's property. I've seen the dust. My son has asthma. I know the importance of having good quality air because I've seen the seriousness of asthma attacks and how scary that can be. So it is very important for all of us to address this. It's more than my pleasure to work with you in the community and to advocate on your behalf so that we can make change within the community. And I'm more than happy to do that and highly enthusiastic to do that as well. And so that's certainly what we'll do, and I appreciate your support.
All right. Well, thank you. I know you're sincere, and that's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for bringing your graphics again. I know you brought some the July meeting, and you have a few more for us this evening, so that's very helpful. I'm going to suggest we take these last two questions, and then we'll move on to the second part of this evening's agenda. Yes, sir.
Yes. My name's Reed Elliott. I live in Zora. I am literally trapped in the aggregate area. So regardless of what some might say about the dust is getting better, in my opinion, it is not. Over the years, I have done such things as, that's out of my eave trough. I know there are people in Beachville that will tell you they've had the same problems because they've told me. My question is, and my problem is with the MOE, I've been having these problems since 1991. So my question being, is the MOE cooperating fully? Because I've never had it. Are they going to provide the highest quality of data and analysis like they did for Peterborough? Because in Oxford County, I haven't had it. I must have, I'll bet I have between 100 and 800 complaints into the MOE. I'm lucky if I ever see an officer. And I have recorded over the years the dust problems, the noise problems, the blasting, and yet the quality of life continues to suffer.
Okay, thank you, Reed. Peter, would you be able to comment on the role of MOE and the work that you're doing collaboratively with the ministry?
Certainly, historically, the MOE has done a poor job in terms of collecting that data, analyzing that data, and then making some interpretations from it. There's no dispute about that. I feel quite comfortable and confident during the past 6 to 12 months that the Ministry of Environment has taken this on a higher level and has now taken control of the air monitoring equipment that they should have been responsible for many years ago, and are collecting a good set of data to make those informed decisions and to identify what those next steps will be. Pat Olmos and her team and Rob Wrigley and at the Ministry of Environment have been in constant communication with Oxford County Public Health, and they've also worked with Public Health Ontario on air quality data and the interpretation of it and how it can be applied in the field within Beachville using the dust track equipment. So I feel good about the relationship. Bureaucracy can be very difficult. I'm a person who likes very thin bureaucracy because I'm more of a doer, and so the faster I can get things done, the happier I'll be. And so when you go higher up in the levels of government, the bureaucracy can become a lot thicker. So in order to retrieve information about inspection results and air quality data, I can understand the frustrations with that. I know some of you have approached us about the historical data and how to retrieve that. And I'll be honest, I'm just trying to look forward, and I've said that before, and not to discount the importance of the historical data, but I am more interested in the data that's moving forward so that we can really make those informed decisions about what today looks like. And so I do feel comfortable and confident with the Ministry of Environment today. I feel they are doing a better job. Once again, I'm more than happy to be that liaison between the Ministry of Environment and Oxford County Public Health to help you retrieve information, because it is important.
Thank you.
And thank you, Reed. And we'll take one last question from this gentleman.
Don Clark, Ingersoll. Actually, I have two. The first one's for whoever wants to answer a somewhat technical question, not very technical. Can you, when you do your sampling, can you determine, did the dust come from a cement plant, a lime plant, a farm field, particulate from combustion engines, or do you just know that it's there?
Okay, thank you, Don. A question about the monitoring and the source.
Yeah, so excellent question about source attribution. The short answer is no. The dust track units that we are using do not lead to source attribution where we can have a filter, send that filter for analysis to determine what the source is and where it came from. So that's the short answer. The good answer is that the Ministry of Environment is looking at adding a filter medium to their air monitoring units that they have here currently so that they can do more type of source attribution analysis. And so that would be helpful in the overall assessment to determine where that particular matter is coming from, whether it's the trains or the agricultural practices or wood burning stoves or the industry. And so that's something that we are looking forward to in the future. You kind of triggered a thought from mine. I need to contact the ministry to see where that is, because that was something that we spoke about 2 or 3 months ago, and I think that would be an important component to this investigation.
This wasn't my second question, but based on your answer, when you've completed this, made your final report in December or January, according to the handout, you won't be able to assign any blame, essentially.
Assign any blame. Well,
that may not be the proper terminology.
Yeah.
But.
You know, we're autonomous. You know, we are a board of health. We are autonomous. We look after the local needs of the community. I mean, that's the way boards of health function and are governed within the province of Ontario. So we can make very strong recommendations with regards to any of our findings to advocate and to promote mitigation strategies that would promote the well-being of the community. So, you know, the Board of Health is an autonomous
but who do you assign them to if you don't know where it came from? Who do you tell to clean up their act if you don't know where the dust came from?
Well, what Public Health Ontario is doing right now is measuring the air quality, of course, right? So, as I mentioned, there's been a few spikes that have been identified. The question is, why and where those spikes were occurring. Why is that occurring? Where are they occurring? So now we have to go back to some of the data. We look at weather data. We look at the time of year. We look at the practices there. So we can make some, I don't want to use the word assumptions, but we can identify possible sources of where this particular matter may be coming from, and then we can move forward with that information. So yeah, we're not doing source attribution. We're actually collecting the particular matter and analyzing it, but we are looking at characteristics, physical characteristics within the community that might have led to those blooms.
So you'll know it's there, but you really won't know how to correct it.
How to correct it? Well, in terms of how to correct it.
Obviously lower it, but how do you lower it if you don't know where it came from?
I think we're maybe moving one step ahead, but I feel pretty confident that when we finish the air sampling, we can have a pretty good idea as to what's happening. So in that Peterborough study, they identified, and Public Health Ontario was involved in that Peterborough study where they did the air monitoring, they identified spikes, and they associated those spikes with the production of the uranium mine, if I'm not mistaken. And we can do that as well. So they didn't do source attribution. They haven't said this is the particular matter and this is what the composition of the particular matter is. But they associated those spikes with operations. Yes, Suzanne?
They actually did attribute it to sources by doing microscopic analysis of the particulars that they collected.
The MOE did?
Yeah.
Okay. And so as I mentioned, the MOE is looking at that here too, so, which would be good. Yep.
Second question. This is
One more, Don, quickly.
This would, well, I couldn't let it go. This is more for the politicians and the administrative types. This air study is being paid for with taxpayers' money. And don't tell me it doesn't cost an Oxford anything to have Health Ontario, because there's only one taxpayer. Is there any concern among the politicians and the administrators that this air study is what Walker Environmental Group should have done in their environmental assessment if it comes to pass, and we're paying for it on their behalf now, and they can use this information?
Who would like to?
Yeah.
It is a good segue to our next presentation, so maybe we
Well,
should.
it's overlapping, so.
It is overlapping, very much so, Don, yes.
I mean,
so
it's air study, and it's connected to the landfill, so I don't care when you answer
Yeah.
it. But
Well, I think Peter Pickfield will actually get into some of the work that is ongoing. So perhaps it's opportune to give him the opportunity to come up and give us his overview and update on where things are. Oh, do you want to respond before you get into your presentation? Okay. Okay. So once again, this is Peter Pickfield. He is legal counsel for the County of Oxford for the landfill proposal. So perhaps, Peter, I'll get you to answer this gentleman's question, and then we'll get into your presentation.
The answer is you're not wrong. The information that comes out of this new study. Yeah, I should get closer to the microphone. The answer is you're not wrong. The information that comes out of this study could be useful to the Walker environmental assessment if the terms of reference are approved, if the study goes ahead. And I don't know what to say about the taxpayer implications of that. We're asking Walker to do what's called a health impact assessment, which is not what this is. This isn't a health impact assessment. What this is gathering of the important information about air quality impacts as they are today in this area. That's only one input into a health impact assessment. A health impact assessment has many other components to it, not just dealing with air, dealing with all the other environmental components, and dealing, as was mentioned earlier, with the social and the economic implications in terms of health. It's a much broader study. So you're not wrong that this information could be useful to Walker, but it is a small portion of what Walker needs to do the job properly.
that's true with regard to the health impact assessment. But there is an air study, a separate air study. At Thorold, there was not even a human health risk assessment, but there was an air study, about this thick, and they had to pay for it. And I'm concerned that we're paying for it.
Yeah, I think that I don't know how to respond to that from a taxpayer's perspective. I sympathize from taxpayers. You're wondering whether or not this is, where does this relate to what Walker should be doing? But I can tell you that the impetus for this study is not only Walker. I think it's broader concerns that we've talked about tonight about the long-term impacts associated with air quality.
Maybe if I can add to that as well. The reason we're at doing the Beachville airshed work, the reason that Peter's been involved in the work that he's been involved is, quite frankly, we weren't satisfied with what the MOE's responses were when we started asking the question. So as we work through this work and get some answers around what are the issues, because we don't have that gap in data, or we have that gap in data. At the end of the day, we will be having conversations with the MOE if Peter's study finds that there are issues that we need to address. I'm quite sure that the warden and Mayor Lupton and Don and I will be at the Ministry of Environment talking about what they should have done and what the, if you will, the provincial, and in fact, it's not Walker, but rather Carmoose, should have dealt with over the years. So I think, and it's separate from the landfill. It's the Carmoose aggregate operation that we're talking about for the moment. It's the baseline on which the Walker environmental air quality work will have to go from in order to be able to assess whether it's the incremental or the cumulative. That's a question still to be asked if they get to that terms of reference stage. But at the end of the day, our issue is the MOE hasn't responded accordingly the way we think they should have. That's why we're taking on the work. We'll be talking to them when we have better results and looking to the MOE to provide some answers and address that issue of why should the Oxford County taxpayer pay for the work.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for adding those additional points. And Don, thank you very much for your questions. We are now going to move to Peter Pickfield's presentation. He'll give us an update on where the landfill proposal is at.
Thank you, Diane. And I wanted to reiterate what everybody has been saying tonight about this is impressive to see this number of people here on an awful evening, awful driving evening. And also, for those who are here to talk about the landfill issue, in an awful process, a process that is it's been in kind of a stagnant period for a very long time, waiting for a decision from the Ministry of the Environment. And yet, despite that long pause in the process, there's a lot of people here tonight, I sense, that have it on their mind. So what I'd like to do tonight is to give you an overview of where we are now in the EA process, just remind everybody where we are, the nature of the process, and then some idea of where we might be going next, what the next steps will be. So to start with, I have technical issues. Leave me. Good. Apologize for that. Thank you. So to start, Walker Industries, everyone knows this, is proposing a large-scale landfill. It will be, if approved, it would be one of the largest landfills in the province. And it's being proposed for a worked-out quarry, the Carmoose Quarry, in an area close to the boundary of in one municipality close to the boundary of 2 other municipalities in the county of Oxford. A couple of things need to be set up front about landfills, particularly landfills of this scale. They present potential serious long-term environmental liability for the municipalities involved, potential serious long-term environmental risks. In a number of areas. This particular facility will present long-term potential concerns with respect to water quality issues because it's being proposed as an engineered solution in a worked-out quarry facility. So there's potential serious issues with water quality. There's potential serious issues, landfills and their relationship to communities. Is important. There are potential serious land use conflict issues. There's no questions that this facility is something that the community needs to, and the municipalities involved need to pay very close attention to as it moves into this approval process. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's a private facility. So private facility means that it's a facility that all of those long-term risks that I talked about are borne by the local communities and the individuals who live near the facilities. But the benefits, the profits are accrued remotely by the stakeholders of a company and by others who might benefit from the service. It's a provincial-wide facility. All of that means that what needs to be considered is a very thorough, there has to be a very thorough environmental analysis, there has to be thorough economic analysis, there has to be a public process to decide about this facility, and that's why we have the Environmental Assessment Act. But the third thing that I wanted to say about the facility like this and a process like this, and this comes from dealing with landfill cases for most of my career, beginning when I was just a young buck. And I dealt with a facility very similar for this, acting for a ratepayer group in the early 90s. It was a facility in Flamborough in a worked-out quarry. And I can tell you that the process itself, one thing I've always observed through going through these types of cases, the process itself has impacts that are significant. The process, and this one is already becoming painful, but I can tell you it could go on for a lot longer. The process of getting through the approval process brings the community through the ringer. And I've seen that over and over again also. So that's all by way of negative backdrop. And I wanted to lay it out at the beginning because I wanted to sort of give you my thoughts about that kind of from a personal perspective before I go into what lays ahead of us on this process. The first thing I wanted to say was that it is a provincial approval process. The Environmental Assessment Act is essentially the grandmother or grandfather act for the approval process because it establishes a broad-based study process that we're just at the beginning of here to decide whether or not this landfill has acceptable environmental impacts and whether or not, from a planning perspective, it should go ahead. So we're at the early stages of that process, and it is a provincial approval process. So the municipalities involved in this process are stakeholders, as are all the residents and other community interests in this. They're not decision makers. So what 4 municipalities most affected by this facility proposal have done is they've come together and proactively at the very beginning of the process, before the terms of reference, draft terms of reference was even brought forward, and decided they needed to take coordinated action through this, what I talked about as kind of a long and potentially painful process. And so they developed a joint municipal coordinating committee. And I hope most of you are familiar with the committee by now. There is coverage on a regular basis. We try to keep it updated on a website that tells you pretty much the whole background and information to it. But the thumbnail of the environmental or the municipal coordinating committee is that it's the 4 municipalities, Zora, Ingersoll, Southwest Oxford, and the County of Oxford, coming together. And what we did was we brought forward to Walker a proposal to carry out an independent peer review with a multidisciplinary peer review right at the beginning of the process, gather together a team that doesn't have a horse in the race, so to speak, doesn't have any vested interest in the outcome of the process, to come in and give independent as possible, expert advice at each stage in the process. So there's a 20-member team. I'm involved on the team as to provide the legal input and advice to it. But there are members of this expert team covering all the disciplines, including hydrogeology, noise, dust, traffic, air quality, and social impacts. There's a land use planner on the team, and then a health impact assessment specialist on the team too, and other subdisciplines. And certainly there is also expertise to deal with the landfill, the logistics of landfill design and operations. So the team is multidisciplinary, and it reports only to the 4 municipalities through their coordinating committee. So that's the structure of it. The coordinating committee itself, its main role is to make sure that the information, that the study review process at each stage is independent, it's complete, it's comprehensive, the questions are being answered. The committee oversees that. It's a committee composed of politicians as well as CAOs, the CAOs of the 4 municipalities. So at a high staff at the high of staff and political level, so we have the mayors and the CEOs as on part of the coordinating committee. They're overseeing it, and the committee also is focused on making sure that the information is disseminated and available to the public. So and that's partly, in my view, is partly a great benefit because of what I was speaking about earlier, that the process itself can have adverse impacts, and what people need is good, solid, credible information through the process, so at least they have some sense, they have some objective information. So that's the thinking behind it. It was developed very early on in the process. There was a commitment by 4 municipalities, and there was a commitment to make sure that the rate, back to the ratepayers and their cost, that the ratepayers didn't pay for that it was paid for by Walker. So we got into a session with Walker, negotiated to make sure that the cost of that process, that peer review, is paid for by Walker, but they don't get any chance to have a say in the terms of reference for the work that's done by the consultants, in directing the work that's done. All of that is done by the committee. So that's the concept of it. What we've done so far, what the committee has done so far, is reviewed the draft terms of reference. Walker released, first of all, I should mention that the MOU for this was signed with Walker and the 4 municipalities back in January of 2013. And then the peer review was established in February of 2013. So the team's been working for 2 years now on this, and we didn't think 2 years ago that we would still be here at this stage in the process, but here we are. The draft terms of reference, just to show why it's taken this long, the draft terms of reference and review took place back in the spring and summer of 2013. And then in the summer of 2013, the JMCC and Council made their first submissions on the draft terms of reference. And this will tell you a little bit about how the process works. The JMCC, what it does is make sure that the peer review is done properly, thoroughly, etc. And then it provides it as a resource to the 4 municipalities. So then they each take the peer review reports, including this report as early as the summer of 2013, and they consider it, and then they come to their own independent position. So each municipality comes to its own position on whatever stage of the process they're inputting in, so that there's a difference between the actual peer review process, which is intended to be objective and independent, and the positions that are taken by each of the municipalities. So that has been carried through at each stage that we've been involved. Okay, see if this is going to work. Small round of applause for the computer. So in 2014, there was an amended terms of reference submitted to the Minister of the Environment. And as everyone knows who's been following this in this room, this whole process has started to happen in fits and starts. First, we have a terms of reference submitted, and then we have an amended terms of reference submitted to the minister. So they're taking a couple runs at this. The amended terms of reference was submitted in 2014, and then following that, there were letters of submission from each of the municipal councils on the amended terms of reference that went, and again based on the peer review of the amended terms of reference. And also that was supplemented by letters to the minister reinforcing council's position, and also the particular important point, which I'm going to come back to in a minute, that all municipalities who have been involved in this support, which is the need for a full health impact assessment as part of the EA process. And I will come back to that in a moment. So also in we're now to the end of 2014 and into 2015, and right now what we're doing is we're waiting. We're waiting for a decision by the minister. It's taking a very long time, even in and of itself, I would say that that's an impact, waiting for something like this to come down. But the other point is that the ministers, I wanted to make was what are the minister's options at this stage? And when the decision comes down, it'll be one of 3 things. It'll either be to deny the terms of reference, and I'll talk about the implication of that in a minute, to approve the terms of reference as is, or to approve the terms of reference with amendments. so that the minister has the power to do all three of those things. I will also mention very briefly, there's the fourth option, which I believe isn't too likely, but it's possible, that the minister could refer the matter to mediation so that parties could mediate or discuss trying to resolve issues. Now, I will tell you that has never happened for terms of reference in my experience. Once submitted for approval, there hasn't been mediation on a terms of reference ordered by the minister, but it's always possible. And this process seems to be bringing in new ideas all the time. So I wanted to set out our position. Now, our position, by our position, I mean the position of the 4 municipalities that they share coming out of the peer review process. The JMCC position, so to speak, because it's shared by all 4 municipalities. In addition to that joint position, each of the municipalities involved have passed their own separate resolutions identifying other elements and other parts of the position, but I'm here to speak on what's shared amongst the 4 municipalities tonight. And what's shared is, first of all, that the TOR does not address a variety of specific technical issues which have been identified through the peer review process, and those are all documented. They've been given to the minister. The minister knows what all of those issues are. So there are all of those technical issues. I'm not going to discuss them in detail. I can answer a few questions if people are interested. But the second big theme from all 4 municipalities is this need for a health impact assessment to be included within the EA process. And what the applicant Walker has proposed is that there be something akin to a health risk impact assessment, which we've already talked about a little bit tonight, but it's a much narrower focus, a much narrower type of a process. It doesn't comprehensively address the health issues, and it also looks at it at a risk level as opposed to looking at it at an impact level. It's a different animal, and it is a far less rigorous process. It's not something that any of the 4 municipalities support. They support a full health impact assessment. The third element of our position is a request to the minister that the terms of reference be denied and approved only with those amendments that we have requested. So denied as is and approved only if amendments are made to correct the technical issues that we've identified and to include a full health impact assessment. Now, just a couple, I've mentioned, we've already talked a little bit about the difference between a health risk assessment and a health impact assessment. And Peter may want to speak to this also. I'm sure he's got maybe a more technical description of the difference. But my general understanding is that one way to look at it is that with a health risk assessment, you're looking specifically at specific risks like the risk of disease and not going much further than that. But with a health impact assessment, you're looking at the whole range of health impacts that could occur around a facility of this type, including social and economic issues and how they impact the health of a community and the health of individuals in the community. And Walker contends that a health risk assessment meets the EA needs, and we strongly disagree. The JMCC member municipalities all are unified, as I indicated, that a full health assessment, health impact assessment is required. I will tell you, just to tell you about from past experiences, this is an emerging field and an emerging issue, and the Ministry of the Environment for many years has not required any kind of health impact assessment. They've assumed that environmental assessments cover off all of the issues through the little individual disciplinary reviews of impacts, and that you don't need to have an overview health impact assessment and look at the broader health issues because the standards that are complying with the standards that are in place would be enough. Well, I think we know something about that on the air quality front, that even with all the standards in place for air quality that we have right now, there seems to be an issue in Beachville. So is it adequate to just maintain, meet all of the current standards and say that you have not impacted the health of a community. We say not. We say that you need a full health impact assessment of this facility. The other element of what the municipalities are doing that is important to emphasize right now and hasn't really been talked about yet tonight, the County of Oxford has now undertaken an official plan review on the whole issue of community sustainability. And they're building into that review a look at the way in which our current planning policies in our county official plan deal with a facility like this, and looking at through through the community sustainability plan, looking at a community vision and a decision matrix to address these types of facilities, which have broad long-term implications for communities. So that work is underway, and there will be a public process around that. And I'm not here to speak to it in detail tonight. I'm not prepared to speak to it in detail because I don't know all the details of how it's unfolding yet. But certainly you can find that out. That's being run through the county planning department. Yeah, and Peter's here to speak to answer questions on that also. A last point I want to make about the current situation, and this gets back to the point I made a bit earlier about it's very much a provincial approval process. You can see the municipalities, the 4 municipalities impacted by this proposal have been very active and involved in trying to cover their bases in terms of reviewing and being informed and being a strong stakeholder in the process. But ultimately, the decision will be made at the provincial level. And one of the things that has come up from time to time in the process is, well, can municipalities pass a bylaw to ban a landfill? Or can they pass a bylaw to put in place constraints, such as the constraints on importation of fill, constraints around leachate treatment, etc. These are all matters that are within the municipality's jurisdiction generally to deal with, but they can't pass bylaws that are aimed at having dramatic kind of banning effects that will stop a landfill proposal. That won't work. And I'll tell you why it won't work is because there's case law and there's that where these types of bylaws are struck down if they're not being used for the specific narrow municipal purposes under the Municipal Act that they're intended to be used for. So municipalities can't set up traps for facilities like this, proposals like this, to try to stop them. They can try, but my opinion would be, and my experience would be, that those types of efforts will typically be struck down in court. There'll be a lot of money, time, and energy wasted on it, and legal fees. But it won't ultimately be successful. The process really has to be, the focus of the process has to be the decision maker, and that's the province. That's the focus, in my view, of all of our efforts has to be to focus on the province and make sure they have all the information around this proposal. They have all of our concerns on the table, and they know our views, our community views on this proposal. So what are the next steps? Where are we going from here? First of all, the 3 basic outcomes that I mentioned earlier. If the TOR is denied, what happens? Well, if it happens, the EA process stops. We all breathe a sigh of relief, but Walker may go back and say, I'll revise the terms of reference, I'll consult and revise the terms of reference, and could come back with another terms of reference, and we could start all over again. So I don't know what Walker's corporate strategy is, whether or not they would accept a no on a terms of reference and walk away or not. They've invested some money in it, but they probably have, they may well be willing to keep investing more money in it. So that may not be the answer, but I can tell you that if it is denied, then for the time being at least, the EA process stops and it's Walker's move. If the TOR is approved without amendments, I can tell you that the 4 municipalities involved in the JMCC would find that an unacceptable result, and they would voice their approval. But what's the approach that happens if that happens? Well, that has to be considered by the 4 municipalities if the ministry decides they're going to simply reject the submissions that have been jointly made as well as the individual submissions. Each municipality is going to have to decide then what they're going to do. If it is approved with amendments, then there's a study process to see what amendments were made, and did those amendments sufficiently address the concerns of the 4 municipalities. Is a health impact assessment included? Are there other gaps in the process? And again, the approach has a question mark on it, because we need to assess at that point what the terms of reference looks like, and each municipality has to make a determination what position they want to have to take, what they're going to take going forward with that approved terms of reference. So when the decision comes, and it could come within the next week or 2 or a month, we're kind of in a stasis on this. When the decision comes, the municipalities are going to have to move quickly to try and sort out what their position is going to be going forward on this. If it is approved, then Walker gets to go forward, and they go forward with an EA study process. And the EA study process, believe it or not, all that we've done up to now, this terms of reference process, is really just a sideshow compared to what is supposed to happen after that, which is the full EA process. It's intended to be a very thorough process. It's intended to be a process which involves extensive public consultation and involves a multidisciplinary study and review process of the project. And so it will move forward in accordance with the terms of reference, which will define the scope of the studies. After the studies are complete, the next formal step will be the formal submission of the EA document itself for approval to the Ministry of the Environment. And as soon as it's submitted, that triggers another public review process and commenting process. So the public will have an opportunity to comment when the EA is submitted, before the EA is submitted, when the EA is formally submitted, and after, one more time, after the Ministry of the Environment releases their formal review of the EA. So after they receive all of those submissions, the Ministry presents a formal review of the EA. So that formal review then gets reviewed by the public, and you have an opportunity to make submissions to the Ministry. And then at that time, you can ask the minister to either approve it with conditions, we can ask the minister to deny it, or to send it to a public hearing. So there's a potential for a public hearing on this proposal at the very end of the process. I can tell you that I cut my teeth on 9 or 10 hearings on landfill proposals back in the late 80s, early 90s that I was involved in. But then something happened in about 1996, 97 with the change of government, and they stopped having hearings on landfill cases under the Environmental Assessment Act. They just simply stopped having them. The Act reads, it's the minister's absolute discretion on whether or not a hearing will happen. Well, before 1996 or so, he exercised his discretion by always having hearings for landfill EAs, and since that time, they've exercised their discretion by never having landfill hearings for EAs. So there's virtually been no hearings of any kind. But there is the opportunity for the minister to have a hearing. And you can imagine that hearing would be long, expensive, and an ordeal in itself. So you can see we're not in a sprint here. We're potentially in a marathon. Now, after the EA is approved, I'll just sort of finish the approval process for you. After the EA is approved, there are other approvals that are also required. There's an environmental compliance approval. There are approvals under the Planning Act. And so the municipality actually has to approve the county official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment by the township, And there are site plan approvals also. So there are a series of Planning Act approvals that come forward. All of them have opportunities for appeal to the board. So there is potential for hearings on those after all of the environmental approvals are in place. And there also has to be finally an amendment to the aggregate license to amend the rehabilitation plan for the quarry, because right now the only thing that can be done at that quarry after aggregate operations are complete is its rehabilitation. So there needs to be an amendment to that license application by Carmoose, probably in conjunction with Walker, to permit an amendment to the rehabilitation plan so it can be rehabilitated via a landfill site. So, it all sounds like a long process, and it is a long process and enormously expensive for everybody who wants to participate in terms of time, resources, effort, etc. But that's what sort of lays before you as we move into this process. From the time being, we wait and we find out what happens next from the ministry. Subject to that, I'm open to any of your questions.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for that very informative overview. We have a few people lining up for questions. We're at about 20 to 9, so we're going to take about half an hour or so to work our way through questions that people have. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. It's Mike Farlow, and I still live in Ingersoll. My father said that whenever somebody was doing research or was doing statistics, they always asked two questions. Who's writing the check, and what do they want the answer to be? And participating in the Walker CLC, it became apparent to me, in my opinion, that everyone there knew where the check was being written from. So I think the fact that we're doing a separate air study and pushing for the health study to be separate is essential, and I think it's money well spent. Because I don't trust the process at all. I mean, we have, since 1975, the exact same process, and there's pictures showing that that process hasn't worked. And we haven't been protected in the case of our air. And I'm certainly not counting on this EA process to protect now not only our air, but also our water. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to put garbage down your well. And I think it's important that the process is participated in, and I appreciate all the efforts that are being made in that. But for those of us with a bit of a rural background, if you want to get a cow to move forward, you twist its tail. And I want to thank everyone in this community that have signed the 30,000 letters that have gone out to twist the tail of the minister and to get them to look at this process, look what it does to a community, not only in terms of the resources it drains, how uneven the playing field is to come into a community and take the number of volunteer hours and the people that have committed to get informed on what's going on with this process and then to make a decision to fight it. Like, that's being robbed from every other organization that those volunteer hours could go to. So there's a huge, huge social, economic impact. And we know that the process isn't being followed by the minister. And we have other complaints in terms of not just the health impact study, but other things that could be brought to the minister's attention as to why this is wrong. And so I'm a believer in saying no to the landfill today, no to the landfill tomorrow, no to the landfill forever. And if it has to be 3 no's, 100 no's, it's still no, because it is going to have a far worse impact than it is right now. And I do have a question.
Okay,
and, it's regarding the expansion, a possible expansion of Lafarge, which could be an alternative site to be considered. I mean, any hole in the ground is going to be looked at. And I just wondered, it's classified, it wants to expand 12 times, and all it would need is to change the classification of the land from A2 agriculture to M3. And so does this moratorium to wait till we get our art protected, can that the government, maybe, I don't know, Peter, you can answer this, or can they stop that expansion by saying, no, we're not going to change A2 to M3?
Okay. Mike, first of all, thank you for your prior comments and observations, and Don is going to address your question specifically.
Thank you.
The land in question for Lafarge, it's actually already zoned MQ, so it's zoned for extraction. The only approvals that they do require at this time are a site plan amendment under the Aggregate Resources Act. So the only municipal consultation on that is through the ARA process. So the county township would be only commenting agencies.
So all that land is, like we were showing a map that in terms of their application, and it showed all the land was A3, so, or A2, so that, is that an inaccurate map?
That's inaccurate. It is zoned MQ in the township zoning bylaw, which is quarry industrial, and it is zoned for extraction.
So there is the local municipal governments have no control as to what happens now?
No, we're only commenting agencies, so it is up to the Ministry of Natural Resources, the local Elmer office, to make the decision on that application.
So to me, that makes this effort to make sure the air quality is safe, because if they can expand 12 times, that's north of us, and the wind's going to bring it all the way down through the county. So that just reinforces the extra concern that you know, we're able to do this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Suzanne.
My question's for Peter Pickfield, and I have a few questions about some of the documents that I presume the MOE should be looking at when they're considering whether or not to let Walker go ahead with their EA. So the MOE's reasonable use policy guideline B7 regarding site selection and containment attenuation buffer areas. The MOE guidance manual for landfill sites receiving municipal waste, which says that fractured rocks such as limestone is a poor attenuator. The MOE guideline for the hydrogeologic assessment of proposed landfills under the Environmental Protection Act Part 5 says that it's a policy of the MOE to select sites that have natural protection. And MOE guideline C1 regarding the absence of long-term field data for liners and engineered facilities. I've heard some comments, even from people who are sort of involved at a municipal level, that Walker is allowed to bypass these considerations because they're a private proponent. And my understanding is that these considerations should be applied by the MOE to any landfill proposals within Ontario. And I'm just wondering if you can assure us that these are some of the documents that the MOE should be considering in their consideration of whether or not to let Walker carry out an EA for a landfill in the Carmoose Lime Quarry.
Go ahead. It should be, but we're, go ahead.
Let me just use this. More comfortable with this microphone. So those policies that you identified, and I haven't looked at them all in detail recently, but they sound like policies that would govern reviewers, Ministry of the Environment reviewers who are reviewing applications for landfill proposals under the Environmental Assessment Act or other acts. It doesn't matter whether they're private landfills or public landfills. Doesn't matter, they can be any kind of landfill. And those types of guidelines govern the way in which those the way in which government reviewers and decision makers, including the Minister of the Environment, should be looking at this proposal.
Thank you. That was my understanding, and I just want to make sure that it was really clear to everybody. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Yes, ma'am, your name is?
Ann Slater from the northwest corner of Zora Township. I have a couple questions for Peter. So I'll just give them both and you can deal with them however. But first, since you've been through this lots of times before and you mentioned the impact and the challenge for communities on getting through this. So if you have any advice on a community getting through this long process. Right. And my other question is, you know, there's one municipality that ends up being the host. The impacts, I mean, that's Zora. The impacts are spread out over a few other municipalities. So are there things that the host municipality has to sort of pay attention to? And in how they move through the process and give their positions and whatever.
Okay, let's take your first question.
Right. What can communities do to be talking about the impacts of the process, to deal with those impacts of the process? One thing to do is stick together, because and to organize together and to be a coordinated voice, if you can, as much of as possible, and to coordinate and resources as a community, because you're a more effective voice if you are coordinated, in my experience. And it's good to have access to experts, lawyers if you can get access to, and other consultants to assist you through the process. So experienced lawyers can help guide you in a lot of ways. I know when I was acting in many of the cases I've involved with, I was acting for community groups, and our firm worked with the community groups to develop approaches to organization and fundraising, approaches to how do you work meaningfully and efficiently through the process, because you can burn yourself out. As individuals and as groups, you can burn yourself out. So marshaling your resources and recognizing, as I said earlier, that it's probably going to be a marathon, not a sprint.
Okay.
And so those are some of the things that I've learned. Those are pretty anecdotal. I'm not sure if they're helpful, but what I can offer right now.
Mm-hmm.
On your second question, maybe you can remind
It
me.
would pertain to the host community. Could you just...
Any differences on, I mean, you know, you have one host community, in this case Zora, you have other communities, other municipalities that are also feeling the impacts, and are there things that the host municipality has to keep an eye on that may make some differences in how they have to respond at various times?
Every municipality is different. This is a situation where you have three different municipalities in close proximity, which isn't always the case. I've been involved in too many cases where that's been the case. I know I act for the host municipality. I act for the Township of Zora. The advice I've given them to date is to do what they've been doing, which is participate credibly, methodically in the process, and learn. Learn as much as you can about the proposal, about its potential impacts, and about how it's going to affect your community, so that you can make an informed decision and a credible decision at each stage in the process where you're required to make a decision.
Okay, thank you for those questions, Anne. It's good to have the opportunity to get Peter's advice on those particular issues. Yes, ma'am, your name is?
I'm Mary Cooper, and I'm from Ingersoll. And I kind of have a comment, but I want you to sort of think and maybe you can come up with an answer for me. It's about engagement and being informed in engagement, as Peter Crockett explained. I'm talking about the possibility that the TOR is approved and we're moving on. The next step that Walker would be looking at would be identifying and evaluating the alternatives. Now, this community, over the course of consultation, has brought out hundreds and hundreds of concerns about traffic, location, the leachate, the liners, and that will all be part of the preferred alternatives. The JMCC, when the draft terms of reference came out, there was a big media blitz informing everybody, telling them what's coming up, how to get involved. I think some of you remember these. I'm really hoping that you can do the same sort of thing as each milestone in the TOR comes up, or in the EA, sorry. Because this is a community, they live it every day, they're the experts, so they should be able to say, okay, if you tell them Walker's looking at traffic and this and that, they can come in and say, okay, we're on the roads every day, this is what we see, this is what our concerns are about your traffic alternatives. And I'm really hoping that the JMCC or the municipalities in some way will really promote and inform the community that this is what is being asked of them, this is how they can participate.
Okay,
I'm gonna
thank
let
you,
Peter
Mary.
answer that.
Peter Crockett would like to
Okay.
respond to that.
Peter Pickfield may want to add to this. We did that back in June of 2013, I believe it was, predominantly because at the time there was confusion over whether it was appropriate for the public to make comments on what was called, and Peter referred to, the draft terms of reference. And it was the part of the process where Walker was doing a draft terms of reference, not submitting it to the MOE, not the formal part of the process, but rather they were doing what they thought was consultation with the community that would then form the amended terms of reference, which they were going to submit to the ministry and file that for the public, formal public review process. Our concern at the time, the discussion at the JMCC was there's too much confusion about the whole issue of whether or not it's appropriate to make comments at this point. There was some dialogue going around the community we heard that suggested it's better to wait. And our point of that whole process was we didn't feel that Walker was getting enough information out to be clear about what the process was, and that at the end of the day, there is no such thing as commenting too often. Any opportunity was an opportunity to comment, and it was necessary. We will constantly, and Peter is always giving us advice around whether or not Walker is fulfilling their requirements under the process. We talk about it at the JMCC and amongst the, and with the various councils to make a determination whether, regardless of the minimum, do we feel that the appropriate information is out there, and if we need to, we absolutely will be doing that kind of work again.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to add to that. I was right on track with what Peter said, is that this is supposed to be a, quote, proponent-driven process. The proponent is supposed to be responsible for ensuring what you just described happens, that the public gets knowledge, clear understanding of what when they're supposed to participate, how they're supposed to participate, information they're supposed to provide, and they're actually evaluated, in fact, on the effectiveness of that public consultation process. That's part of the approval process. But we're here because we want to make sure that happens, and it hasn't always happened. So we have a website, we have a communications person at the county who assists, who deals with the communications and works with our committee. And we talk constantly at our committee meetings about when is the appropriate time to tell the public that they should be inputting to the process and how they should be inputting the process. We try and keep our website up to date on those things too. We will continue to do that for certain.
Okay, my point was that if you read over the disposition sheets and people bring out consultation as a concern, Walker's always put down that we've made this available, we had open houses, we had newsletters, we
Right.
had whatever. So in the MOE's eyes, they have tried to do consultation, and if it's one person or 20,000 people show up, that one person, that's still consultation. And I want to make sure that this community stands up and gets involved and has a say. So I'm not sure, like, I appreciate that you want to keep that up to date, and I understand it's on Walker, but I don't want to see this community lose out because they didn't understand what's being asked of them, or they miss out on an opportunity to have their say.
Yeah, there are certain legal points in the process where you're required, where the public has an actual opportunity.
Yes.
Those should be clear. And then there are these informal opportunities that could be important in the process. I think, and we've tried to provide information on the website of when the legal opportunities are. Maybe we should put something on that makes that clear when they're coming. I kind of summarized some of them a moment
Yeah, they
ago.
have the different
Yeah.
milestones for
Yeah.
sure is in the TOR, so
Yeah.
especially those ones, and maybe those are the ones that Walker's pushing, but just some encouragement. I don't know whether it has to come from the JMCC or municipalities or just councillors talking it up with their community, but I would really like to see more information going out to the public.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for sharing your thoughts, Mary. Yes, sir.
Tim Lobson, Ingersoll. I don't know how many people were here with amongst 200 so people back in October 2013. People were banging on the walls. Mr. Pickfield was the one that advised them behind the closed doors on eventually what we got. So just keep that in mind. Back in, don't sue me, I don't have any. Might have been less since this dump fight started, in all honesty. Back in April 2012, I encouraged our local council and our local county council to start to ban the importation of waste. In October 2013, they actually got around to trying to do something. And 8 months later, even though I asked for regular updates from the JMMC members, from county staff, we got 0 updates. All I had to say was, it's in the works. So it took us 8 months to decide what a sustainability plan was going to be. And then it took us until the exact day after the election before we actually got to see it. And you talk about a political process, I tell you, this is one of them. We went through 2 elections. This is one of those things. We talked about you mentioned about banning leachate, right? And I says we should ban the cross-border servicing of the landfill, right? They can't pump it over there. Can't do it, Tim. Can't do it. But then Woodstock takes the county to court, to the OMB, and wins. It's like, geez, maybe there's a chance. Excess soil. Clarington Township passed a bylaw banning the importation of excess soil. They couldn't deal with the federal lands, but they could deal with all the transportation on the way there. 70 municipalities have an excess soil bylaw, not a fill bylaw, an excess soil bylaw, and they control it. Clarington Township got the industry so worried about where they're going to put their excess soil, which is a big component of the dump, that they've already started, they started their own association up to combat it, and now there's a provincial review. So you tell us that excess soil, don't worry about it. You can't do nothing. You tell us that banning the leachate, you can't do anything about it. I'm really considering why we're even here. Why don't we just tell them to come on in? At least show us a bone, tell us something, not this sustainability. We couldn't even get a high school student to comment on the contest, not one, not one. I asked for an extension on the contest. No, we're not going to get a contest. So I would like somebody to explain to me how this sustainability plan is going to fit in and give us this goalie equipment so that we can send Mr. Huff before an OMB and stop this landfill.
So your specific question is in reference to the sustainability plan, which I believe Peter
plan fits in because it doesn't fit in my world.
Okay, Peter, please.
So I'll give you my comments, and Peter, I'll supplement with the legal part of it. First and foremost, right now we have an official plan that does not allow anything outside of the municipal boundaries to connect to the water and wastewater systems. Any connection has to go through an official plan amendment. That's in process right now, so that already exists. The question that is before staff and we need to report back on is the issue of trucking leachate and whether or not leachate can be received by truck, not by direct connection, which is not controlled within our official plan. Whether or not that leachate can be taken at any one of our wastewater treatment plants. The answer to that isn't as simple as ban it because of the whole issue of the amount of trucked wastewater that is delivered into all of our plants today from various operations around the county and coming into the wastewater treatment plants as their disposal points. So we need to understand the issues of what our plant capacities are relative to the kind of waste we've got. It's important to note that there is no application for trucking leachate into our plants from any landfill site other than our own that we do. We do truck the leachate out of our Salford site into both Ingersoll and our Woodstock facility. If we got that application, obviously we need to deal with it. Council has asked staff to report back on a policy framework, not unlike what Mr. Lobson's talking about in terms of trucking leachate to our plants. We aren't going to do that without having understanding the legal aspects to it, but also the technical aspects in terms of what our treatment plants can manage. I will tell you, all of my experience on trucking, whether it doesn't matter what kind of wastewater it is, the transport of waste will not, of what the leachate, the wastewater, will not decide on the location of a wastewater or of a landfill site, I don't believe. However, we do need to do that work and bring that policy work back to council to make a decision on that side. In terms of the community sustainability study, appreciate your insight, Tim. The legal advice that we got, the planning advice that we got is if we want to win, when we go to the OMB with official plan approval or official plan amendments to better control, manage, or regulate the development of landfill sites in our county, we better have our act in order and a platform, a legal basis on which to form those official plan amendments, or no pun intended, we're going to get blown out of the water when we try to defend that at the OMB. When you go to the OMB, you defend on the basis of legal and planning advice. If you don't have a basis for that, you will not win. And that was basically the advice we got. That's why we're doing the sustainability plan. That sustainability plan is not just about landfill, it's about broad community sustainability. The idea being that if we are a community that truly believes and have a plan to get to that sustainability vision and are successful in developing that community-based plan, and by the way, so everybody knows, there are 15 people from your community, from our community, that are developing that sustainability plan. Some of them are in the room tonight. They are involved in developing that plan for the community. There's lots of opportunity for dialogue, and quite frankly, the rubber's just starting to hit the road on that. The idea scale, the work in terms of the ideas from the community has just closed. The committee worked on that aspect of it last night to help to give the consultants some information on how to pull that together. In the month of March, we will be releasing a draft plan which will be out there for all kinds of public comment, all kinds of public insight, so that council can deal with that in June and July when we take back a formal sustainability plan. It is not just about landfill, it's about broad community sustainability. But in order to manage any aspect of our sustainability, we need that platform. And I'm not sure if Peter wants to add from a legal standpoint why that would be so.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Peter has said, but what I would want to say is I didn't want to indicate to you that when I mentioned those examples earlier in my remarks, that those are not important initiatives to follow through on. You know, looking at the issue of the receipt of soils at facilities, looking at the issue of leachate and management issues. Those are important county issues to look at, and also the overriding planning process that's been initiated is also an essential part. All three of those things have to happen, and they are being pursued and reviewed. But what I really wanted to say in my earlier remark was that you can't develop a program that's focused on stopping a particular project with those undertakings. Those undertakings have to look at in a broader way. They have to be technically based. They have to be planning based. They have to be countywide, or they will fail. They'll fail at the Ontario Municipal Board, or they could fail in the courts. And so they have to have an independent rationale and basis. But if they come together, and I think what the county's doing is right in pursuing all of those issues, but pursuing them in a methodical way, because if they come together correctly, they will provide a good regulatory framework and maybe a good regulatory defense against a facility like this if it doesn't fit into that framework. But it has to be done methodically. It has to be done on a technical basis. It has to be done with legal and with planning rationale behind it, or it will fail.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for that answer. I really like that one. All the submissions that I have done have all come with research, with links, with proof, with documents, with newspapers, and everything else, and it fully supports what he has said, not what I'm being told by a certain group of people. So, thank you very much.
Okay, Mike, and thank you for raising the issue of the sustainability plan. I think it was helpful to dive into that in a little bit more detail. We're going to take two final questions this evening, and I'll turn to this gentleman, please.
My name is Brian Smith, and I live in Sweetburg, about half a kilometer from George. So my question relates to what Peter described as the fits and starts to this process, and relates to a document called the Code of Practice. My reading of the Code of Practice suggests that that is not what the Ministry of the Environment has been following. It looks more like they're making up things as they go along. What kind of levers might that provide this community in our sustained battle against this dump? And how might that help us have a kind of consequence like the Adams Mine community had when they defeated a dump after ministerial approval?
Just to clarify for everyone before Peter responds, you're referring to the ministry's code of practice for the preparation of terms of reference?
Yes.
Okay, just so everyone knows the document. Peter?
Yes. Okay, so first of all, that document is a guideline document, so unfortunately it doesn't have a legal status. So that's problem number one with it. It is intended by the Ministry of Environment and their Environmental Assessment Branch to guide all stakeholders, including proponents, in the EA process. So you would think that spending the time to develop a document like that, call it a guideline document, that there would be more compliance than we've seen. And we haven't seen compliance. Documenting the absence of compliance through the process may be useful, but it may be useful only in the end for political reasons, for political purposes, to show that the ministry has not actually followed their own code of practice, and neither have the other stakeholders. So documenting the distance between what actually happened and what happened in that code of practice is important to do, but it isn't a stopper from a legal perspective. It isn't something that necessarily will stop the process. The Adams Mine proposal was stopped on a political basis. It wasn't stopped on a legal basis. It wasn't stopped through it was actually approved by the Ministry of the Environment. So it was stopped because council backed off on it. And there are other examples of that too. So I mean, I think there's the legal process, there's the planning and approval process, and there's the political process, and they're all at play here.
Okay. Brian, did you have one more quick question?
Well, I think I have some reading that Mike has passed me to do. Which paragraph, Mike?
Just quickly, please, Mike.
Just team up. It actually is in the Environmental Assessment Act that says they're not allowed to have those timeouts. So that has some legal clout.
The Environmental Assessment Act?
Yes. Regulation 616/98.
There is a regulation which establishes deadlines which they've missed. So the ministry has missed deadlines, and so legally they're out of compliance with that regulation. What's the recourse? And so the recourse is, I mean, there's no clear recourse against the Ministry of the Environment for failing to comply with the regulations.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Thanks very much for your answers, Peter.
Thank you. And one last question for this evening. Yes.
Hi, Howard John again. Couple of quick additions and requests. During the health process, Mr. Haywood, can you add the word cumulative to the health studies? Instead of just the existing, add the word cumulative, because we're not just dealing with Carmels. We're dealing with Reed's Eaves troughs from Federal Way. We're dealing with cumulative in the region, and it's needed from a base study perspective, as well as adding on the landfill issue, that type of thing. I'd like to remind everybody and to all the councillors that are currently serving all of the various councils, that when that liner leaks, every councillor is legally responsible for the net effect and personally responsible for it as well. And if they get sued, by default, every taxpayer is going to end up paying for it, not Walker. I'd like to see that resolved. When we have the questions of the M&R, and we have a current aggregate license, we have an existing mandatory rehabilitation plan. What is our county doing to enforce the completion of that Aggregate Resources Act rehabilitation plan? Because if the pit doesn't exist, you're not going to have a dump.
Okay,
We're
Howard.
being put through the ringer pretty unnecessarily on that
You had a specific question there. I think Don can answer that for you or provide a response.
That was one of the key issues that we looked at initially, was how was that process going to fit in with the landfill. In our discussions with the Ministry of Natural Resources, what we've been told is that the application for the Aggregate Resources Act change of site plan will come after the environmental assessment is approved, if it is approved. And the province will not make a decision on that change while there is another process in place. So, because they can't approve it until it receives approval from the other body. So it is a last step in the whole process. Notwithstanding the fact that right now it does say it's to be rehabilitated to farmland, they can, and there is a legislative process that they can make amendments. Any site plan can be amended through the Aggregate Resources Act and at the Ministry of Natural Resources.
Okay, this goes to the will of the people in the JMCC and our county councillors. Do they have the will to turn it down?
They don't have the power to turn it down. It's the Ministry of Natural Resources. The local council.
Excuse me. They get to respond when that amendment request for end-use change comes to play. And that decision rests on the 4 immediate councils. They are all on record as not being unanimous at county council about the import and not allowing the importation of waste. I want to know if the county and the JMCC, the participants, have clearly indicated to Walker that they have zero intention to allow any different end change use to that particular parcel of land.
There's been nothing put forward right now.
Wouldn't you, I apologize, I interrupted. Wouldn't you expect that to be a proper defensive position from the members involved?
When the time comes, the municipalities will make that point to the ministry. At this point, there's nothing on the table to amend the site plan, and the municipal councils don't have the right to say no. They have the right to submit their negative comments to the ministry, and the ministry will make that, the Ministry of Natural Resources will make that final determination whether the site plan should be amended as proposed by the proponent.
Okay, that's not the way one of the lines in the ARA reads.
No,
because it has to be approved.
No, that's
from, and a positive amendment from local councils before it proceeds to the next level.
No, it's approved. A major site plan amendment is approved by the district manager at the Ministry of Natural Resources after consultation with the local municipalities, the conservation authorities, and any other affected bodies, and a decision solely rests with the director at the local branch whether that decision is made.
I believe the word positive approval is included in there.
And just perhaps the other point that that you raised about the legal responsibility for local councillors should the liner fail. I think Mr. Pickfield may want to address the whether the local councillors can be sued on that.
Oh, okay. If a liner fails on an approved landfill site, and the municipality has no approval authority over that, they're not operating the site, and in my view, there is no grounds of action. There's no cause of action against a municipality if a liner fails on a private landfill site or its municipal councillors.
I believe that's contrary to the post-Walkerton results.
I disagree.
Thank you very much, Howard. I'd like to draw the evening's proceedings to a close. We're at about 9:20, and before I turn to Warden Mayberry, I just personally would like to thank everyone in the community for coming out, for sharing your thoughts, questions. We hope that you did receive some valuable information this evening. And I believe that Peter Crockett would like to speak, and then Warden Mayberry.
I just wanted to follow up on the post-Walkerton comment that was just made. After post-Walkerton, the legislation change that did make municipal councilors legally responsible for municipal water systems, not for the issues that we're talking about in terms of the landfill site. So it's two distinct issues. We do have, and municipal councils will have, liability over the protection of the municipal water system. Regulatory authority. And regulatory authority over that. And due diligence, legal, I forget the exact legal term for, under the Safe Water Act. That is not anything to do with liability under a landfill approval.
Thank you, Peter. That's an important clarification for everyone.
Okay, first of all, I have one apology to make, and it was an oversight, and when I made my opening comments, Mayor Comiskey from Ingersoll would have liked to have been here, and he asked me to extend his regrets, and I regret for not doing that at the beginning. From a politician or political sort of thing, we need every one of you. We need every one of you to continue pushing and working as you have, and we're deeply appreciative. There's times we're not going to agree. There's times when we're going to be doubtful of each other, where, heck, I'm doubtful of my wife sometimes, especially when she stays with me. But I think if we don't keep our eye on the goal, then we're in serious trouble. So we need to work together, every last one of us. We want to work together, and the township has, the county has created a website for the JMCC. Please use it. Check it regularly. We'll try and keep it updated. If you need to know something, let us know so that we can respond. But I think the most important thing I wanted to say was that whether you believe it or not, every politician, and there's a number of them in the room tonight, are actually human. They care just as much about their children as you do about yours. They care just as much about their grandchildren, their community, their friends and neighbors. In fact, the only reason someone's dumb enough to be a politician is because they actually care what happens around them. And they're willing to put their name forward and say, I want to serve too. I want to help. I want to build a better community. Now, that may not be true for every politician, but it's certainly true for the vast majority that I've met. So we need to remember something, and I don't really care whether you like me or not. You can determine that at the next election. But I think what we really need to remember is that it's not the politicians in Oxford that are in your way or creating the problem. We've got to focus on who gets to make the big decision. And that's the province. And I don't say that to deflect any kind of attention away from the local folks. I say it because, plain and simple, folks, that's the answer. The province gets to decide. If we got to decide, it would have been done 2 years ago, and you wouldn't be here, nor would I. We don't get to decide. This is a big issue, and the province gets to overrule virtually anything we want to say. I very much care about my community. My grandchildren are now the 8th generation on the same farm, and I hope it goes for at least another 8 generations. I have no intention, someone said they wanted to, I think it said they wanted to die here. Actually, not in a big hurry to, but when I do, this is where I want to die. We are incredibly fortunate, incredibly blessed to live in this area. And I think every one of us wants to protect it for the next generation. Folks, we're in this together. There's not one politician here. There's no big transformation when you get elected that you come from being a decent, moral human being to some kind of wingnut that doesn't care about what happens. There's not one of us that don't care as much about this issue as you do. In fact, if we didn't care, we wouldn't be here. And so for that, I'd like to say thank you very much for being part of this community, for working as hard as you do, and I know some of you are working a lot harder than even I am, and I appreciate that very much. We do it to build community, and we do it for each other. And I promise, and I think I can promise for every politician in the room, we'll do our very best. And when you don't understand why we're doing something we're doing, I would beg you to come and ask any one of us, and we'll be glad to explain. And sometimes, and I know Margaret and I can sit there quite cozy tonight, sometimes Margaret and I don't even agree. And I think that's important, because in fact you want a variety of ideas so that the best idea will sift up to the top. So I would say to each of you, let's work together, let's pull together, and let's do the very best we can. Because as it was pointed out a few minutes ago, if this thing goes wrong, it'll be all our great-grandchildren that will pay the bill. And frankly, I don't have them yet, but I know that I love them way too much to let that happen. Have a great evening, and again, thanks for all your work and for coming out tonight.